All right. It's 11:31, so let's get it started. Um, yeah, since this is our first class, I'll just kind of like put some norms out there for me. It's nothing like that different from what Brian said. Not going to monitor the chat. Sometimes I'll comment if I see something. But the one thing I want to make sure that we do is use the raise hand feature, because that's really the only way that we can like order who gets to ask their questions. And if you kind of just unmute and go out of order, then it's harder for me to get to everyone's questions, and it's harder for us to kind of like be fair in that way. So that's like my only kind of like main thing that I wanted to mention. And yeah, and I'm like super flexible. Like if I'm not getting to someone's raised hand and you've noticed, hey, this person's had their hand up for a while, like you can interrupt me and say like, hey, like there's a couple people with their hands up. All of that is fine with me. Happy to have that support and that help from y'all. Cool. So I think like what I'm gonna do, I've got like kind of a little bit of like a lesson plan to go with here, and I'm gonna drop that in code help, just because there's so many things that get posted in like our main channel that I think, at least for me, I'll put like the lesson specific stuff in code help, and then any questions that like come up as we're going through this lesson, like that you all have like pertaining to the specific lesson here, you can thread on the message that I put, or you can raise your hand and ask aloud. Either of that is cool, but I've got kind of like a little agenda of how the class is going to go. And basically this should be like, I don't really want to say review, but I know y'all had like a how the web works intro lesson in mod 1 that is similar to this. So what I'd like for you all to do is in some breakout groups, go and define some terms. This class is kind of like really more high level theory, and there's less of a chance to kind of like get your hands dirty and do stuff. So that's kind of where that's going to come in is I'm going to have you all go define some terms and then go answer some questions. And I think like having the breakout group, you can kind of lean on each other for support if things are like, oh, I'm not sure about this one. But I think the best way to get through this is to kind of like split up like the terms that are going to be defined and then the questions that I'm asking you to answer in your group. And then discuss once you've kind of given that a shot. And you can use the lesson, you can use the internet. I mean, there's no right or wrong resource, but I want you all to kind of like go out and define these for yourself. And then we'll come back together, and I'll answer any questions that you have, and we can kind of like discuss these terms, and then these questions. And then from there, I'm going to show you kind of like a diagram and an analogy. And then for the second half of class, what I'll want you all to do is either diagram the analogy on your own and diagram it from scratch, or if you'd like to, then you can come up with your own analogy. And so if something's kind of like popping up for you and you're like, oh, I've got this one, then you can come up with your own analogy and diagram that out, and then we'll kind of share those together. Any questions on that kind of approach to the lesson today?
Hey, Tim, can you
Hey.
just reiterate how the next like 30 minutes will be used?
Yep. So I put like a post in code help that kind of like defines these, but we'll take like 8 minutes to, in breakout groups, go and answer some questions and define some terms. And like if you don't get through all of it, like that's okay, because we're going to go over that, and then we're going to spend the next 10 minutes where I'm going to introduce a diagram and show like an example of the HTTP request response cycle, so that you get a visual of that and an introduction to that. And then second half of class, we'll do you'll do your own diagram, and then we'll share and discuss those.
Okay, thanks.
Cool. Other questions coming up? All right, so I'm gonna do 4 of y'all per room, it looks like. So there'll be a couple of groups of 3. Let me just make sure I don't have 2 instructors in one room. Okay, cool. Great, yeah. So try and split up these questions and the terms that you're going to define. And instead of taking 8 minutes, let's take 10 for this, and then we'll come back and discuss. I'll call on some of you to share out what you found. All right. All right, cool. It looks like everyone's back. I'm recording. All set. All right, cool. So I'd love to define some of these terms as a group. Yeah, so let's go through them. If you had URL, I'd love to hear from you. What would you come up with for the definition of URL? And you can just use the raised hand button. Awesome. Yeah, let's hear from Sean.
We discovered it was a uniform resource locator, but more commonly known as just the web address.
Cool. I'm happy with that. Another term for it is universal resource locator. I don't think that necessarily matters too much to kind of like um, make that distinction. But yeah, universal or uniform, I think is okay. Brett, go ahead.
Are you going to share these notes
Yeah,
or pin them?
I will.
Cool, thanks.
For sure. And then what else? Did you come up with like an example of a URL, Sean?
I didn't, but I don't know, example.com.
Cool.
Would that suffice?
Yeah, I'm actually going to take the one from the lesson plan just because it's kind of it's longer, and with the URL we're kind of talking about all of it. So we're going to split this URL up into its specific parts. But when we're talking about the URL, like if I even look at the page that I'm on, I'm using Google Docs. This entire thing would be the URL up here. Cool. Yeah, Will, go ahead.
Is URL only used in the context of the internet, or does it have a broader translation for like, I don't know, like FTP or something, other protocols or whatever? Or is it always a web address? That's the only.
That's a good question. I'm gonna say I don't know if FTP would use it. I don't think so because I think like FTP has like the server address that it wants to go to and like maybe like the location on that server's file system. But to be honest, I don't know on that one. I think like I would assume like when we're talking about URL, we're generally talking about like an address for the DNS lookup location like on the internet is what I would think about. FTP different, so FTP is like a different protocol, file transfer protocol, and it's just like a different way for servers to communicate. And I don't think they use the term. Well, I don't know. I'll say I don't know. Good question though. Yeah, let's hear from Jake.
Is URI a thing as well? Because I came across that in Task Manager and I didn't know if that was just like, oh, we forgot to capitalize the L on this one, but I thought I saw it a few times. Would that be like a local version of URL?
Yeah, so not necessarily a local version, but the URI is kind of like synonymous with the path, and so we can define the path. If we take this entire URL here, then the URI for this URL would come right after the .com, and then it would end before this this question mark, which is the indicator for query parameters. So we would say that the URI then is this tasks / new, and I can define that here. And that stands for Universal Resource Indicator, and that's kind of like the specific part of the URL that we're trying to access. Was that helpful?
Yeah, definitely.
Okay, cool. All right, I'm gonna move on. I think this is pretty good for URL. Anyone come up with something for client? Yeah, Hope, good.
So the client would be, from what research I did, it's either the hardware or the browser that you're using to access the information. But it specifically is not the person accessing the information.
Yeah, I like that. Yeah, so we'll say not the person. So, and this is because the person is our user, right? The person's our user, but the person needs a tool for us to be able to access the information that we want when we send a request. And so you can think of like right here, like what you're seeing here is the client Chrome, right? And Chrome is my client, which has a tool for sending HTTP requests across the internet that is abstracted away from me, right? Like I just need to know about the user interface of the client, which is Chrome, and how that's working kind of under the hood is abstracted away. What I need to know is, hey, what's my URL? And I will type that in up here. And once I have that information, I can send my request, and the client's job is essentially in my abstracted away view. It's not quite done, but it is done in terms of what it needs from the user. Then when it gets the response back, it also interprets the response and displays the page. But the client is responsible for both sending the request and then interpreting the response and delivering the web page based on that. Cool, I like that definition, I hope. Garrett, go ahead.
One other thing that our group talked about is that obviously, like for our purposes, it's often going to be a web page, but it really, it probably isn't limited to a web page in like the sense of like APIs, where it might not be a web page that's interacting in the request response cycle, but it could be really just whatever piece of technology is making the request essentially.
Yeah, I like that. I like that distinction of kind of saying like, hey, the client like has a way to not just deliver web page content, but as long as we have the address to the server, I want to be thinking about like the client has the ability to request information from a server and then interpret the response, which isn't always going to be a web page. So yeah, I like that distinction a lot.
I also think, Tim, I also think kind of what Garrett was referring to as well is that the client can be something other than the browser. So it could be like another application. And that's kind of what we talked about from, APIs, like having applications talk to each other, not just browser to application.
Totally. Yep. That's like a totally valid example of what a client can be. And yeah, I think we'll get like, I think like we'll get deeper. It's okay if like that doesn't totally make sense right now, but I think like as we get deeper into the mod, you'll see that like the client of Chrome is one type of client, and then yeah, another a separate application that's an API could be another type of client. Cool. Yeah, thanks for pointing that out. Yeah, Sean, go ahead.
Because we're talking specifically all software, is the computer, phone, tablet ever referred to as the client, or is that something slightly different?
That's usually referred to as like the piece of hardware, because all of those examples that you gave have to run a program that is the client, right? Like your phone, if it's an iPhone, is running Safari, which is the default browser, and yeah, I would think of those two things as separately. Yeah, Hope, did you have a question or is your hand still up? I wasn't sure. Cool.
No, it was just still up.
Gotcha. All right, cool. All right, let's try and I'm gonna try and pick up the pace here a little bit. Anyone come up with something for a server? Yeah, Connor, go ahead.
A server is any computing piece of machinery that processes the request.
Yeah, I like that. Anyone have anything to add to that?
I would say it sends a response to.
Okay, so I heard Brett chime in and say responsible for the response. Hope, what do you think?
The server is where the data is stored that you're trying to access.
I want to say yes, and I'll say I want to make the distinction that the server doesn't necessarily store all the data that you're going to need, but it does have access to the data that the application that's like running. How do I want to say this? The server might have access to other servers that have data that it doesn't necessarily have. Like there might be a server that's responsible for retrieving data in the database, and then there's also a server that's responsible for just running the database. So I want to like make those two distinctions that we'll probably be storing, or at least for the purposes of mod 2, we're going to be storing data in the database, and there's actually kind of a server that's abstracted away from you. That's the database server, and that is separate from the web server that then requests information from the database server. So it's kind of like, yes, what you said is correct, and there's some kind of like moving parts underneath there that I want to like make the distinction on. Cool. So we'll say responsible for retrieving data, and then could have a web server, could have a database server. Cool. Hope, did you have something else? I thought I saw someone else's hand up too. Okay. All right, cool. I'm gonna move on from server. Let's do request and response. Did anyone do request and response? Cool, let's go to Hope again.
A request is the query it's the combination of a query and an information that you're sending to the server with the intention of getting a response.
Yeah, so there's a number of things that are in a request that I'm not gonna get too far into, but I'll say like the request has a number of things that we define in HTTP, like, it has the resource that it's trying to locate. It has, the location of that resource in the URL. It has, probably some headers that tell it what kind of request this is. So I think like query of information to the server is like for right now, like I'm good with this. And I saw, Jesse, your hand's gone up like a few times and then like gone back down, but I want to give you a chance to add to this.
Yeah, sorry about that. I don't really have anything else to add to it. Really just a user, as I understand it, according to the lesson plan, a user will supply a URL to the client or to the web browser, and then the client itself will build a request to be made to the server for some information.
Yep, I like that you added that. Built by the client with intentions of reaching the server. Cool. All right, so we're up against time. So here's what I'll do. I'll ask if you have answers to these, if you like in your group you had response or HTTP or any of these questions, here's what I'd like you to do. Post it in the thread that we have in Code Help, and then I'll kind of come up with like a synthesis of these things, and I'll go through those as we start class in the afternoon. Sound good? All right, cool. I don't want to cut into your lunch. I know it's a long morning, so go have lunch, and we'll be back for PD. You'll be with me at 1.